we'll just do it. 9 o'clock, okay. All right. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And the blue sheets are out there. Please remember to sign them. Okay, this is the note well. You should have seen this many times before. Well, no, but you see this other places, right? Well, anyways, okay. Here's
Note it well.
Note it well, read it. If you haven't read it, you should really read it. Okay, so here's our agenda. People can bash the agenda. We started bashing just the fact that the agenda was not there in an email, but anyways, and we'll have just a few minutes to updates from area directors. These are, you know what, I updated these this morning, but anyways, so we're going to rearrange things a little bit because Brian Rosen had travel difficulties, so he's not here yet. So we'll leave that till the end. If he's not here, by the time we get ready to transition to art, we'll leave it to the end. And if he's still not here, the chairs will run through slides. Okay, and then we're going to do the JSON contact. We're going to try and do remote, see how that goes. Again, it's Monday morning, first time. And then web packaging, and then we switch over to the art area. And we'll let the IDs talk. We'll talk about BOFs, new working groups, and then we've got Anders is doing the JSON canonicalization. Okay. Anybody have any comments on the agenda? And next time I'll cut and paste. Or I might not tell you when it's there. Okay. Okay, dispatch. Okay, here are our deadlines. And again, we just work backwards from the main IETF draft deadline. And coincidentally, these are the exact same dates that align from 2016. Because I took slides from 2016 and I just had to change the year.
So this is Montreal, right?
Yes.
Montreal deadlines.
These are Montreal deadlines, yeah. IETF105.
Okay.
Yes, Montreal. We'd like to give people the heads up, right? Okay, and then here is the link to the wiki. This is where you can find further information on a regular basis. Okay, working with deadlines. Again, we have hashed some of this on the mailing list. People did really well this time in terms of making deadlines, which we appreciate. And again, it's helpful to put dispatch in the draft name because it makes it a whole lot easier for me to do double checks and try and pull up the right drafts. I did upload or point out that there are 3 specific working group documents associated with this that's in the meeting materials. And that's as best as I could figure out. So I don't guarantee it's all of them. And there is, Jeffrey and I, we had the discussion on the list for people that bothered reading all of that. And we're not sure that individuals can actually do replaces. So if you're like changing the name of your individual draft, whether or not you can they do it? When submitting, okay, this is the whole thing. So when we were trying to figure it out, the upload tool was blocked. You couldn't go to pretend you were going to upload something to see what it was that you could choose from.
And the chairs and area directors are going to be talking about how we can streamline this a little bit, whether it's a tools thing or something.
Okay. Okay.
People.
Yeah, Alexa, yeah.
Well, people can always ask ADs to fix it. So.
Alexia's volunteered to fix anyone's issues.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, and again, a reminder, the mailing list, we do have, I don't know why we say Rye there. That's interesting. I guess I did. Anyways, because Rye is gone. So the art discussion list is art@ietf.org, and then, of course, dispatch at ietf.org. And that's something, you know, people, if you're looking for agenda time or you think you have a topic that's ready to dispatch, and we can dispatch before a meeting, right? For example, the RUM charter, we've actually already reviewed it in the working group, think it's ready to go to IESG for approval, sort of thing. So you don't, yeah, please do, yeah.
So every time we get questions about what belongs on art and what belongs on dispatch. And the answer to that is fuzzy. But in general, art discussions are for things where there is work that might be of interest to people, and you'd like to see if people are interested and have some feedback and maybe drum up some support for it. Dispatch is for work where we're actually talking about proposals to have the IETF do something and figuring out where we need to do that work, et cetera.
Okay, and it's not just you all. I'm regularly confused as well.
I'm
So,
confused too. That's the best I can figure out.
all right. Okay, so we're going to get started on our, I thought I uploaded these, but again, it's Monday morning. Okay, so we're going to do JSON contact first, and I don't see.
Rowan says he can't make it for another 20 minutes either.
So is Jeffrey ready to do web packaging then? Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Who's got the flyer?
Okay. Okay, I'm sorry, just hang on.
Be ready. Be ready.
Be ready, but okay.
Join us up here.
Yeah, you can come up here now. Just, you're not going to talk yet. Just don't say anything yet. Anyways, okay, so here's our BOFs and other meetings. The BIMI, I don't know how people pronounce that, is BIMI, okay. It's going to meet Thursday. Other meetings, for people that pay attention to the agenda, there's an open space on Wednesday for people to have these side meetings. So there's several of those. There is a meeting for the RUM working group, kind of a pre-meeting, gather interested parties that want to do work on that. And then there's WPAC, Web Package is going to have a side meeting. And then DOE has various issues they're going to discuss as well on Wednesday. And there's a full link if you click on that. Again, it's on a wiki of all the side meetings. And there is still actually open space if people had topics they wanted to arrange meetings for. Okay, new working group since IETF 103, not just in our area. We put things that might be of interest to people. There's a GIT working group in the GEN area. And then there is the RATS working group in the security area. Okay, sorry. Okay, so we were going to give on the agenda, we had a few minutes for the ADs to say some stuff early on because you notice that we don't have Murray and Cullen up here anymore. And we do want to thank them. I want to thank them for being co-chairs for the past, 3 years? For 3 years. Well,
No, go ahead.
so a long time. So Cullen has been my co-chair since he stepped down as an AD, right? Before that, my original co-chair was Gonzalo, and he became an AD. And then Cullen stepped down then, so Cullen became
I'm sensing a pattern.
a pattern. There is a pattern. So I just stay here all the time, and other people come and go. So, yeah, anyway, and then Ben is stepping down as AD, and we have a new AD, Barry. So Ben is joining me as my co-chair now. So we'll see how long he lasts. Okay. I seem to run through them. Okay.
7 minutes so far.
Okay, that's exactly right. Okay. So again, we did want to thank Murray and Cullen. Murray was wonderful because Murray did the chair charts for the whole time that he was my co-chair. So that was lovely. I appreciate that.
I haven't done anything.
Yeah. He doesn't know. He's,
Still ADs, though.
yeah.
Is being there to co-chair the AD retirement plan?
Whenever,
Yes.
yeah. This is the old folks home for ADs. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, and so we did
call
also,
We
yes.
could call it the AD graveyard, like the elephant.
Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah,
too
I don't know.
morbid.
Yeah, I'm the groundskeeper or something like that at the graveyard. I don't know because
So I'm here until either Alexi or Adam.
I guess so. Yeah. Okay, so we did also want to thank Ben for his time as AD, and we do have our tradition in our area of making sure that they can recover from having been the AD and survive as my co-chair.
Oh, nice.
Open it up, share.
Yeah.
Did you
So-
for everybody?
Apparently not.
Well, we're just giving you this. This is a token.
This is a token.
It's not a very secure token. Well, it is sealed right now. Of our appreciation, and we decided that you really didn't want to have to consume multiple bottles before you went back. You might have wanted to, but what we'll do is you'll get a delivery in Dallas of other gifts.
Oh.
Yes.
Thank everyone very much.
Okay.
You can't see the mic here. It is this is a Republica exclusive. I believe it is probably a Czech whiskey, but it's in Czech, so I can't read it. Thank everyone.
It is a Czech rum of extremely dubious quality. We're not sure how it should
Oh,
be
rum.
dispatched.
That's even
Some
better.
fine sipping rums you should care for carefully. Some other things should be dispatched by dumping them down the sink. We have no idea which that is
Which tab?
when you should dispatch it.
Dubious quality is a plus for rum.
I don't want to get in the way of, this is Murray, I don't want to get in the way of further business dispatch, but I'm wondering if this is why Barry became an AD again, because this gift cycle is going to repeat.
Has Barry finished his beer?
Actually, I think I might have finally finished the last one about a month ago. It really did
I
take
think
a while.
Robert's still working on the
It's
tequila.
quite a generous gift. So thanks again, everyone.
So I also would very much appreciate the people who were thoughtful enough to say that the rest will be delivered in Dallas and not make me try to carry it home in my luggage.
It was my idea, you know.
So while we're thanking people, I'd like to thank our note takers. That's Pete and Jean, and our Jabber scribe, who is Matt.
Okay. All righty. Okay, Jeffrey, you are now up. Okay, yeah.
So interesting now, they all take flight 104 dispatch. So which one is it?
See, I put numbers.
Yeah, but they're so that's not it. Is that?
Yeah.
Web packaging. Okay,
Okay.
and then I think
Do I get a clicker or do I wave at you?
I'm sorry.
Should I tell you to advance slides? or do
no,
I
you
get
have
a clicker?
power.
There you go.
Okay, I'm Jeffrey Yaskin. This is Kohei Ueno. We work on Chromium on web packaging, and we were asked to come here a second time. We presented in, I think, IETF 99 here to dispatch the first time. We think we're going to be ready for a BOF for next meeting, but we want to get the feel of the room for kind of where do we actually standardize this. So to avoid assuming that everyone knows what we've been doing, I wanted to present kind of what web packaging is and describe where we are. So why do we want to do this? We want to allow people to load websites peer-to-peer instead of over their perhaps very expensive or only on part of the month internet connection. This has some benefits in opposing censorship and surveillance that we want to incorporate in the design. We'd like to fix AMP. Raise your hand if you dislike Google AMP. I thought it would be a bunch of people. So we'd like to let AMP documents have their real URLs and not something starting with google.com. And we want to allow non-AMP formats to have the same kind of UI benefits that currently only AMP can get. And so the plans for web packaging achieve both of those. The web publications group is looking at this, possibly just the unsigned version for kind of grouping together books or other publications. Bundles also let you optimize the transfer of small resources, and possibly signed exchanges let CDNs optimize cross-origin resources, like send them over the same connection. We're still figuring out whether that works in a private way. We also want to allow third parties to say, yes, this website is good on some axis. You can imagine doing some static analysis over it and having your client trust it a little more if someone you trust says that it's beneficial. Or you can do binary transparency with this. So far we've had discussions at IETF 99 and 101 about kind of how to do this in a secure way. Based on your feedback, we split signed exchanges from bundled exchanges to explain that distinction. Signed exchanges have a signature on a single HTTP request response pair. You get cross-origin trust in them based on a certificate like TLS, but not actually usable for TLS. It has a separate extension. They expire after about a week to avoid long-lived XSS exploits. And you can update the signature so that after that expiration, you can make a cheap request to say, yes, this thing is still good, instead of having to transfer the whole thing again. Bundled exchanges give you kind of a zip-like format of many request response pairs. Each one might be signed or not. and the format is streamable in random access. So you can do it efficiently both over the network and on disk. So we've fleshed out the signed exchange specification. We've gotten a bunch of investment in signed exchanges from people using AMP. For example, we've got this list of websites that are publishing signed exchanges or working on publishing signed exchanges to get the benefits of getting the right URLs. I think the Washington Post is especially excited about having their content under their URL and not the google.com URL. DigiCert is issuing the certificates you need. Cloudflare is building support for generating signed exchanges from domains that they host or proxy. And Chrome 73 is shipping a version of signed exchanges. Now, the fact that we're shipping it makes a bunch of people nervous because often when you ship something, it gets locked in stone. We've designed so that this will not be locked in stone. We put the URL of the signed exchange at a fixed location in the format so that when we upgrade formats and drop support for the old ones, if people are still serving the old format, you get a redirect instead of just a broken site. So we think that will let us move on to a more standard format as we develop the standard. We've got a bunch of documents defining this whole system. So the first one is the IETF side specification of the format. And then the second one describes particular checkpoints. So right now we're working on publishing the 03 checkpoint, which defines what Chrome ships and what the sites that I mentioned are generating. And that should let everyone interoperate while we work on the next version. We have a YCG repository and specification that define how this all interacts with web browsers, so how you fetch them, how a browser loads it. And then we have a preliminary specification for bundles and an overview of all the use cases that we're trying to achieve. So next, we need to get feedback from these deployments and incorporate that into specifications. We need to make sure that we're not completely breaking the security of the web and improve any points that aren't quite right. We need to specify and implement bundles. Mark Nottingham and the W3C TAG are organizing a workshop sometime between now and the next IETF. The last time I heard, Mark might correct me. Yes, the IAB, not just Mark. To get feedback from publishers, see what they think, what their concerns are. And we like to hand ownership of the documents to standards bodies. Right now, these are things that I can change unilaterally, or Google can change unilaterally, and that's a bad idea. We want you all to own the kind of the definitions. We want to change them by consensus, not just because I woke up on the wrong side of the bed one day. And so the questions, I believe, for this room are, how do we put this on the standards track? Should we create an IETF working group? The scheduled side meeting on Wednesday, assuming that if this group decides to go that direction, we'll probably start working on the charter and a BOF for the next meeting. Part of it might go to the HP working group if that's where you all want it. We believe part belongs in the W3C or what WG to integrate with the fetch spec. But it's possible that you'd say the IETF doesn't care about this at all, and everything should go through the W3C what WG track. So here are some links that you can follow when you look up the slides online. And Kohei and I are here to answer questions and kind of participate in the discussion.
Okay. Okay, good.
Eric Sperlo, Mozilla. Is on? Sort of. No?
You got to get close.
Okay, well, I was pretty close as it was. I think I am. Thanks for setting. Okay, well, maybe that.
Yeah, that's better, yeah.
Thanks for presenting this. I mean, first things first. I mean, this is pretty clearly a major architectural change inside of the web. So there's like no possible way this can like not go to some kind of buff. I have a number of concerns about the actual design structure. But I don't think it's useful to surface them here. Any BOF discussion probably should start with use cases, not with like how do we standardize this particular technology.
Yeah, I mean, we have that document of use cases.
I appreciate that, but there seems to be an implicit assumption that this BOF technology set is the answer to these use cases, or that all those use cases matter, and neither of those things is obviously true. So we should probably start with that, because one thing that happens when you look at the use cases, maybe you have a different technical solution if you think some of these cases are not good use cases. We can always deal with that when we get to the BOF, but that's probably where things ought to start.
You have been welcome to discuss the use cases for over a year.
Yes, and I think we have. Well, do you really want to do this right now?
We have time. We have till 9:35. Yeah.
Outstanding. Outstanding. The problems with AMP are not exclusively included with the are not exclusively about URL substitution. The problems with AMP have a number of ecosystem effects that are in fact made worse by this proposal, not better. So, and in particular, it's not clear that the use cases necessarily have to involve loading the entire target web page from the referring site. The question is how to increase the performance of that, not to load the entire page. I understand that's what Google desire, but that's not the same as important use cases. Similarly, it's not all clear to me the use cases that involve offline to online transition are actually important. I mean, Jeffrey, I don't really want to go into extreme detail, but I think I did give you a lot of feedback from these cases, and they were like, and largely the response I got was, we think these use cases are important, so go pound sand. So, I'm not really sure why you think I had like an obligation to go back and forth with you for like a year on this topic.
So Ecker, are you going to be at their meeting there on Wednesday?
No, web packaging? Yeah, unfortunately, no, because through the clever scheduling at IETF, it's been double booked with Doe, which I also have to be at.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I think Martin will be there.
Okay.
So we have three meetings to be covered by Martin and myself, all scheduled at the same time. It's really great. But I'll certainly come to any BOF.
Hi, Wendy Seltzer, W3C. Yes, as you mentioned, W3C is interested in use cases, and we too I think that there's a lot of distance between use cases and solutions, and gathering the people who need packaging solutions together to figure out where their needs might converge and what the solutions look like, and what piece of the solution this might be. Seems to be, I think, an area where we also want to help be part of the forum for discussion. So thanks for bringing ideas.
Mark, yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Be loud, Mark.
Mark Nottingham. So I think we need a BOF to get this conversation into a more normative, regular venue, so we can make some decisions, or at least, no one can say, well, I didn't come to that because that was just your thing, or whatever. I hear in Ecker and in a little bit in Wendy this criticism or this observation that there are lots of different use cases on the table here, potentially. And from what I've heard, not only from them, but from other folks I've talked to, is if I wanted to meet those use cases, what I come up with to do that might not necessarily look like web packaging. And so that's, I think, what we probably need to dig into as a community more than anything. I think a BOF is a perfectly good way to do that. And I think the workshop we're going to hold is another way to get some information about that. My question for you, Jeffrey, is if the community comes to a place where we agree that these use cases or some subset of them are important to address, but that the solution for whatever reason, and of course the reason needs to be reasonable, does not look like web packaging, are you still on board for that level of change?
I believe so. The big question in my mind is, can we convince the AMP team to switch over to the new thing?
Sure.
And if they wind up not switching, then their ecosystem effects are still there, and we still don't have a standard answer for them. But if we find something that is totally different from this and still satisfies the use cases, then great.
Okay. I mean, I'm very aware that you've put a, frankly, tremendous amount of effort. You and your team have put a tremendous amount of effort into web packaging, and I think that's appreciated, the amount of detail, the amount of consultation you've gone to, everything. But just because you put the work in doesn't mean that it gets adopted. That's how it all works.
Absolutely.
Colin James. Given the sort of complicated I don't quite understand the interactions of how you might see this going forward between IETF, W3C, what working group. Can you talk to that a little bit more and what you expect out of the IETF versus just not bringing it to the IETF at all? What do you expect to get out of the IETF on this in the most positive picture?
Right. So I believe that the folks here, that we need to take into account the knowledge here of the security guarantees of the internet, kind of the meaning of the HTTPS scheme, all of the interactions with TLS. Kind of there's a lot of expertise here that we need to use, and so the question is really like how do we get that into the right, into the structure, and how do we incorporate all of that? The split that I currently have is that the IETF side documents define the format, and the WhatWG or W3C side define how it's loaded, kind of the algorithms for loading it. So that's what I currently expect the specifications to look like, but that's going to be totally up to kind of the working groups that own it. The W3C or WhatWG split is often contentious. Right now we're in the YCG, which is formally part of the W3C, but fetch is in the WhatWG. And so I'm hoping to let that side kind of argue out exactly how that split works.
Ted Hardy, if you get close enough to actually be heard, it shocks you. It's a
by
feedback
design, Ted.
mechanism that maybe we should introduce more generally. But I came to talk about two things. One, I agree with some of the previous speakers that a BOF as the next step makes sense. And I agree with Cullen that it would be useful to know whether it is a task for the BOF to work out where the split is, or whether working out where the split is occurs before the BOF, so that the charter the BOF discusses is already specific about which work is coming to the IETF. And I would suggest that would be a productive use of the side meeting and the discussions before the BOF to kind of get that level of specificity about what the BOF's task is going to be done as early as possible. The other thing I wanted to go back to was the use cases thing, and that is the use case I most care about here is the anti-censorship use case. It's something I personally care about a great deal, and I've talked to a number of people who do peer-to-peer networking and mesh-based networks who would be very interested in using something like this were it available in common applications, because what they're trying not to do is to have formats and methods that are in applications which identify the user as somebody who is interested in anti-censorship, because that's a big red flag that waves very brightly in the face of some of the people who need it to identify people who want to avoid censorship. So I have a really strong hope that what comes out of the BOF is usable for that and is adoptable by a broad swath of browsers and HTTP-based mobile frameworks. Because I think, like many other anti-censorship techniques, the broader the community that's actually using it, the less it becomes a signal of interest. And I think that's very important for that use case here. Thank you.
So Martin Thompson, thanks for doing this. One thing that concerned me, and maybe you weren't thinking about it when you said it, but one thing that really concerned me here was that you said maybe the AMP team won't take that or something along those lines. One of the things that I think, to Ted's point, is the question of who's going to implement this is very relevant when we talk about a BOF. And I would encourage you to make sure that those important customers of this, the ones that we consider really important for this, actually turn up and participate in this. Not just show up for the BOF and go rah, rah, rah. That doesn't work. I would encourage you to actually come and participate. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean driving it or anything, but being there, being present, being able to provide their input to the process is critical to this. And if this is going to work, then the AMP team has to actually be involved. And I would also say that AMP is not the only example of this. There's other people doing very similar sort of things, and I don't know how much you've reached out to those people. Have you reached out to, say, the Apple News folks or any of those other teams?
Right. We have not talked to the Apple News or I think Facebook News teams. I think we've assumed that they like their walled garden, but that might have been a wrong assumption.
Exactly. You'd be surprised how often people don't necessarily feel committed to that sort of thing.
The AMP team has been talking to us, but is not physically here. Are you suggesting that we kind of grab a representative and encourage them to physically come to IETF meetings?
Ideally, yes. But in all these situations, we respect the fact that there's a lot that happens in the IETF that may not be relevant to these people, and traveling is expensive and time-consuming and difficult. And even this participation would be, it's not a huge imposition at that point, and that would be a lot more useful than just saying, oh, well, the AMP team is aware of this, and they may or may not take whatever we do, then there's not a lot of point in doing this.
All right. My point with they may not take it is if the design changes and loses a use case that's important to them, then...
Right. Well, then they need to be involved in that design process,
right,
so that doesn't happen.
Yes.
Dan York, working for the Internet Society, but not speaking for them. We do need a BOF because I think we do need to be clear on the use cases, because some of the use cases I have as a publisher of websites are different than some of the other ones that you're having in that. And to Martin's point, I'm also very much interested in the deployability. I mean, my use case is fairly simple. In some cases, I want something that allows me to do mobile caching and allowing our websites to be deployed into low bandwidth environments packaged and bundled in ways that is standard and is not Google AMP or Facebook Instant Articles or Apple News, whatever else. So I would say, to the point as it looks at if there is sort of BOF, it would be very useful to have some buy-in or some, at least from some of those different parties, to say if this is something that comes up, we will actually use it. Because before a lot of us invest time, energy, and money in coming up with yet another packaging format or something, it would be good to know that there is actually interest in doing something with this rather than just creating something that's not being used.
Eric Squirrel again. Let's sort of see if I can sharpen Martin's point a little bit. I saw a lot of use cases listed here. My understanding is most of the actual deployment of this technology is AMP. Is that correct?
Most of the current adoption is AMP, yes.
Right. So I see a real fail case scenario here, which is that this gets brought to IETF, gets adopted. We're like remotely negotiating with the AMP people for you. And then they decide not to deploy it, and now we have technology which nobody wanted, and AMP, which has no other deployers, and AMP won't use. That's bad. Yes. So, like, I think I want to sharpen what Martin said. If like the AMP people can't be bothered to show up to this, like I just don't understand why we should charter it.
Yeah, I should be able to get them remotely. I think the time zones work for this meeting, and then we can see if they come physically for the next one.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want us to take, I know nothing about this technology, don't care, but I'm just going to tell you how IETF is going to react to that. If a group of people that is going to totally change the architecture of their fundamental product doesn't want to show up to the meeting to discuss it, people are unlikely to take it very seriously, that the odds that they will, even if they send to the list an email, we're definitely 100% implementing that. It's going to be met with a major credibility gap if they're not showing up in person.
I will give them the minutes of this meeting and say, you should come.
I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just saying that's my guess of how IETF is.
Yep, thank you.
We'll point them to the proceedings, right? And they can sit and listen through the 20 minutes of discussion we had here. Okay, this is great. I think this was good discussion. People, interested parties, if you can, understand the collision, should go to the meeting. Yeah, somebody.
Reeling for Eric Berger. Okay, Colin, so we have to show up in person to participate in IETF?
Yes, to be effective.
That's his personal opinion. He's not sitting at the front of the room anymore, anything like that, okay?
Okay, thank you for listening.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you, Jeffrey. Okay, perfect timing as well, so.
Just a quick recap for the minutes. I think what I heard was that a BOF is a good idea. We need to discuss use cases first before solution, and that we need to make sure that the people who are really going to implement and use this are engaged in that process. So if the minutes can make sure we capture that part. All of it?
Sure.
Okay. That we think a BOF is a good idea. We think that we need to focus on what are the right use cases before we worry too much about the solution. And we need to make sure that the people who are going to really implement and use this are engaged in the process.
All right, okay, so it looks like Robert is on the remote now. So if we can go ahead and move to that topic.
We'll have to try the slides.
Right, unless,
So he needs to
why
get
don't you, well, he can come up, right, so Robert, to do the talking, needs to push the button so that he wants to speak, and I'll push the red button and give him the floor.
Yep.
Right, and then you can facilitate if we need.
Awesome. I didn't
The
expect
chairs
that.
apologize in advance for being slackers and not properly setting this up as a remote presentation, so let's see what happens.
Right, do you have
Well,
the
wait,
slides?
to our defense, can you bring up the next set of slides? You're
right.
driving that,
I'm
right? Okay.
Did you fire me, please?
Stand on the pink thing. Okay.
I have no control.
It's not working?
There's a pink X.
Excellent.
It's fine. It's fine.
There you go.
I can stand on this.
This is the JS contact.
All right. No, next.
So all of the, they all say the same at the top of the page,
Yeah.
tab.
No, back. Yes.
There you go.
Woohoo.
Okay.
Okay, so,
Awesome. All right.
so,
Thank
Here we
you.
go.
okay, so,
I'm-
if, okay, excellent, Robert. So I can push the red button and he should be able to speak.
Tell us when you want to advance slides, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Very
Okay,
good.
perfect. So thanks. Unfortunately, I can't be in Prague for this IETF in person. So thanks for giving me this opportunity. I'd like to shortly talk about JS Contact, which is individual draft submission that I sent to Dispatch about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Please, next slide, titled goals. So the goals of, sorry?
I don't know how we adjust this. Sorry, Robert, the people that, it's actually very loud. So we're,
Into the mic.
okay. So go ahead and people just
Okay.
have to.
I lower my voice as well. So are we on slide number 2, titled goals?
Yes.
Yes, we
Okay,
are.
perfect. So the goals of this effort are basically to provide a standardized data model for contact and group information that is that should be an advancement or enhancement of vCard. We are aiming at providing a JSON-based format, but we are not necessarily tied to the exact data format. It's more the data model we are interested in. This is coming mainly from the observation that the vCard model in one way is very much used in the industry. On the other hand, in the last years, a couple of proprietary formats based on JSON or other data formats have been showing up due to the difficulties and incompatibilities that have arisen from using vCard for exchange of conflict information. And we would very much like to steer this effort into coming up with a standardized format that we can further follow on. The goals of this are to, in one way, be less ambiguous than vCard, which is has 3 different versions in practice. We would like to narrow down or remove the pitfalls arising from these different formats. So it should be simple to process, and it should be extendable in a way that different vendors or different use cases can still build on a core format or data model that's shared by hopefully the majority of implementations. Doing that, we intend to start from the current vCard semantics, but we explicitly do not require or do not aim to be 100% backward compatible with vCard. We have seen other efforts in the past, for example, Xcard, which is translating vCard into XML. There is also an effort, if I recall correctly, which represented vCard information in JSON, but again was very much tied to the semantics of vCard and its wire format, which made it kind of difficult to process. So next slide, please. So what we have done so far is that I've written up an individual draft submission based on the proprietary format that we are using at Fastmail. This is really meant to be only a basis of discussion. It's based on our very early JMap draft that we wrote up for contacts, and we are expecting and appreciating significant changes if more people are jumping on this. So we already have seen on Dispatch interest by one other party, and I expect or hope there will be more. So the very much next step would be to instigate more interest and hopefully find adoption by a work group. I'm not sure if Calyx is the right one. I understand it would need to recharter. So that would so we are open for anyone who is interested in working with this on this topic. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Yeah, so we have a few people lined up at the queue, so we'll go ahead and start the discussion here.
Stand out of the way so I'm not accidentally. So as a Calyx co-chair, I think there is a current trend to have all this new mapping, and I think it's good not to let the vCard aside this change. So I would be in favor to have that work done. Where this work is to be done, we used to have a lot of different groups that seems not to, but that's an AD. So maybe I would be happy to have all this kind of work being focused in one working group, being Calyx.
Can you get close to the microphone, because I don't know if Robert can hear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we used to have very different working groups. Very good. So we used to have a lot of different working groups working on the vCards, time zone, Calyx, and I would be in favor of merging all this working group into one. So, but that's more to the AD. So that's why I think Calyx might be a good place, or Calyx Fix.
Okay, so I'm going to just see if Robert's back in the thing. I just want to see if he has a response there. So Robert, you've got the floor again if you have a response.
Great. So my initial response would be that would be very great. I think mostly the main people in time zones, calendaring, and contacts are sharing their interest and working on these topics in parallel. So I think it would be very good to have a shared work group for this.
Okay, Colin?
Apologize. I could see that argument. I was actually going to argue slightly the other way. I like this work. I hope it moves forward somehow. I was actually going to argue exactly to the opposite, is that what happens, we always get that group of people who are then, they don't have any interaction with people who work primarily on collaboration and messaging, which also uses all this technology. So I would lean towards, and also the stuff gets put behind all the other deliverables of the working group. So I would argue for a very small, focused working group just to do this would be sort of my leaning, but I'd be glad to see it move forward either.
Okay, Barry.
This is Barry Leva. I lean toward what Cullen is saying. I think if we put it in an existing working group, JMap is a better match than Calyx. but I would also kind of lean toward a separate working group for this. I also want to, can you go back to the goals slide for a second? The start from vCard but no direct mapping, I would like to push back a little bit on that. I agree that you don't want to limit yourself to what you can do with. Okay. I agree that you don't want to limit yourself to what you can do that requires direct mapping, but history tells us that vCard versions in particular get ossified, and it's difficult to get people to change their vCard implementations to the more modern ones. So I would like you to, as you develop this, keep as much mapping as possible in there to allow it to be ported to older versions for implementations that haven't been updated.
Okay, Robert, do you have a response?
Yes, so it's definitely the plan to keep as much backward compatibility as possible, exactly for the same reasons. It's just that we do not explicitly state that we must be 100% compatible, but it's of course the plan to use as much, to allow reusing as much as data as possible.
Hi, I'm Jim Fenton. I've got a question, maybe in a little bit different direction than where to organize this. But I guess my question is, I have a sense that vCard is something that people don't love, but it's going to, because of all of the ways that they're used in end user implementations, it's going to be very hard to get people to change, just as it is hard to get people to change between vCard versions. And this would potentially be a bigger change. So I'm wondering if you have some sense that this will be adopted by users. It seems like a very difficult sort of ossified standard that I'm not. This would be nice, but I'm not sure it would be used.
Well, we are very, very early stage with this project. So of course, there is the risk that we do not see the necessary adoption or interest for this coming up. Personally, I think it will generate this interest, but I agree, it's an experiment at this stage.
Yeah, this is Barry Lieba jumping back in and responding to that. History has shown us with vCard that when we update vCard versions, new implementations implement the new versions, and I think this would be no difference here. I would expect new implementations to go in this direction, but we've also seen that old implementations are just never updated. So.
Yeah, one more thing is that I'm also not so sure about the. I mean, vCard obviously is used for exchange of contact information, but it's not necessarily also the storage format. So I'm not so sure if it will really, if we will really see that much difficulties into adopting a new format. But that's, as I said, it's just guessing at the moment.
Chris Newman, I wanted to respond also to Jim Fenton's point. I have to, okay, there we go. Okay, so the reason I think this has potential to deploy is I think the change in sort of network API model towards the HTTP JSON model is one that I think is more likely to stick than any of the previous trends like the XML protocols. Now, I could be wrong about that, but that creates an opportunity to get address books, in an API in an API framework where they'll actually be used more and integrated more effectively with other protocols. And so that's why I think the combination of JMAP and this work creates a lot of potential for integration with other applications, and that's why I support this work.
Okay, Barry, we have ADs. Oh, the ADs are going to chat. Okay. Did anybody else have any more comments before we try and wrap this up and decide way forward? No more comments. Alexi, did you want to chime in?
So what I've heard is there is some interest, and it's not clear whether this is going to be suggestion, whether it's go to CalX, JMAP, or any working groups. That's to be decided. But I think there is still a question of how many people are interested in implementing. And like, for example, Robert, you mentioned that there are APIs popping up that are trying to map vCard to JSON. So I think
yes, so sorry?
Seeing the list will, sort of, it's another input point and talking to people about this.
So Alexi, would you like us to ask the room who would like to implement this? Or something like it?
Maybe. I'm not entirely sure we have the right people in the room.
We can see that, right? No hands doesn't mean anything, but lots of hands might mean something. So if you were here and you think this is something you would likely implement, or something like this, or some solution in this space you would like to implement, please put your hand up. I see 3, 4.
Actually, that's more than I expected. So
I think there was close to 5. There's maybe 4.5, but yeah.
F.
Yeah, somebody was
Okay.
bring up, yeah.
May I? Yeah.
Cullen counts for 2.
Cullen does count for 2. John Peterson. Yeah, so I mean, like, I know for a project we're working on in a working group, we're kind of shopping for a way to do vCard with JSON, and there is an existing RFC that is standards track that describes how to do that, and it's okay. And like, if this is better, then we might do this instead. I don't know. What's that?
What he's saying is that he has a use case where he might use this, right?
Sure. Yeah, we're looking at like JSON versions of vCard, and we're like, okay, there is an existing standards track thing for this, right? For like JSON vCard, and if this is like better, I mean, I was just looking at the draft. It's kind of a sketch. It's not like I can tell from looking at the draft if this is going to turn out to be better than what is it, 7095? But I don't know. No, it doesn't mean anything. You asked if there are people interested in doing something in this space, Ben. You cast a pretty wide net. So I was just getting able to say, yes, I raised my hand, but as I clarify, there are applications for doing vCard with JSON. And like, if this turns out to be better than our existing standards track RFC to do so, then like, well, sure, we use this.
So I think the sense is it's probably worth putting a little bit more work in this for people to discuss and provide additional feedback, and then we can see how firm the problem statement is and how, if we have support.
my feeling is that, yeah, we need to do a bit more offline discussion. Probably the draft need to be updated. It's possible we might have to redispatch it.
We'll
see.
Yeah, but discussion on the list is a really good thing.
Great. We can discuss on the list, and we do not have to wait to Montreal to redispatch something.
Great.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Robert.
Thank
That was
you.
great. Okay. Okay, so I haven't seen Brian Rosen enter the room unless I missed him. Okay, so now we're going to go, Anders, did you have something? Aaron?
Hi, Aaron Fall. Scratch me. There was a talk at last night's Hot RFC by a fellow who's a first-time IETFer, Michael Toomam. I suggested he come to the meeting. No, Michael, you here? Yes. Okay, he was talking about a proposal called Braid for doing state synchronization over HTTP. Seems like it's a good fit for this community. I know that he can give his talk in 3 minutes and 30 seconds, which is amazing because it's 20 slides, but it was pretty good. So I thought if you were doing agenda bashing for today, you might add him, but since he's not here, I think he's here for the week, and so it might be worth trying to get him on for your other session because it's called Braid, B-R-A-I-D. You can see the abstract on the slides on the Hot RFC materials. I don't know, show of hands, folks in the room who saw it. Okay, have you folks, folks who think that it would be a fit for presenting in this room? I mean, maybe you got everything out of the first. All right, so maybe I'm wrong, but I thought I'd just let you know. Maybe. Oh, I thought there was a second session. Oh, okay. Okay. I'll see if I can raise him on email, and maybe if you've got time at the end. I was going to
Yeah, we
encourage
may
him to
have
do
time at the end and he can stand up and
Yeah,
speak
okay.
to it, but yeah. Any other business? Okay, Anders? Okay. Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about JSON canonicalization. I start with rationale and motivation behind this. As you know, there is something called JOC, which is very popular. JSON web signature standards have been very successful. They are based on the idea that in order to secure a signature or a data rather, you have to base encrypt it, base 64 encrypt it. And that is fine, particularly for the applications that sort of grew up with JVS, like OAuth and OpenID. But for information-centric systems, like the one I'm working with, it didn't fit so well. I was involved in a bank project where we had signed messages, 4 layers of signed messages. And for that, it meant to have base 64 encoding on each of these layers. It would make documentation, debugging, etc. rather horrible. So therefore, I started to look on the possibility of making a canonicalized version of JSON, which would be similar to what we had in XML. However, I didn't want to bring all the complexities of XML into the JSON world. That would be counterproductive. So the question here, is it possible to do this in a reasonable way? Canonicalization can be done in slightly different ways. One is to do it completely on the text level. I dropped that idea because that means essentially that you have 2 entirely different parsers. First, you parse your message with the standard parser, and then you take the same message and feed it to a canonicalizer. That fits very bad with the existing tool chain. The idea was to make it possible to integrate into existing tools. So the proposal that exists as a draft now is not only a design of mine, it is actually design of several people that have brought good ideas. And it starts with canonicalization of the native JSON elements. You can see from this example what you get is that you order properties, remove white space, normalize numbers, and also make strings have the same escaping. And that's necessary to be able to do signatures. There is a limitation of the proposal, and that is that the number, JSON number, must fit into an IEEE 754 double precision. That doesn't mean that your applications need to be limited, but for the canonicalization, you need it. Now, some people think that canonicalization means that you have a completely unique format, and that is a possibility. Unfortunately, since JSON is very limited type-wise, people stuff things into strings. And in order to create a completely canonical form, you would have to expand the strings, the embedded data types. And that is something which is doable, but we excluded that. And we settled on, the team settled on creating a hashable JSON. That means that to compare different runs, for instance, is not a part of the use cases. It's rather creating hashed versions of data that is interesting. In order to do this, there is a constraint that you must know about. And that is that if you parse a string, a data represented as a string, it doesn't matter if it's just text or an embedded data type, it must be serialized as a string, otherwise it will fail. So this is essentially what this is about, and I'm saying that what this is started as a research project to see if it is actually possible to do canonicalization of JSON, and it is. And we have identified, let's say, the quirks, the things that you must be aware of in order to use it. For some people, it works perfect. For some people, it won't be a good choice. And it can continue. It will continue with solutions that will expand even signature containers, because if you have can go back here to the first here, you see a signature on the third line, a JVS detached signature. If you actually have canonicalization, you can even make the signature container in clear, because it can use the same system. And that means you can see algorithms, public keys, etc., which is pretty nice. That is really everything I have to say, except that I am here to see if there is any interest in running this as an IETF project.
Richard Barnes. Just to be clear, this is on the agenda for SEC dispatch this afternoon, so I think we'll be doing the actual dispatching of this at that point.
It will be the same presentation in SEC dispatch, yes.
But I think discussion is fine here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Carsten Bormann, there are three things I will be trying to say. Let's see whether we get them all together. So the first thing is what this is.
Mm-hmm.
It is a deterministic mapping from a data model object to a serialization.
Yes.
And the problem we had with JSON is that the originator of JSON has steadfastly refused to define the data model. So what we actually have done is we did a little part of that, which is called IJSON.
Yes.
So this is kind of half of the way going to a defined data model to JSON.
Yes.
And whatever this work turns out to be, it's going to define a data model that kind of might be the data model for JSON or something broken. We don't know that.
It builds on IJSON, actually.
Right. So that's certainly the right thing. I'm just trying to say this cannot be done without defining the JSON data model, at least as it applies to this.
Yes.
And I think that's a good thing to do, number one. Number two, there are some details of the current deterministic mapping that you propose that I don't like, but I think that's not relevant for this discussion.
Okay.
So I wouldn't put in UTF-16 dependencies in there and things like that, but that's separate discussion.
Yes.
Third discussion, what's the use case?
Okay.
So I had a guy sitting beside me yesterday in the hackathon who was using bad language, talking about his tools always putting out different data when he is running tests, so he cannot compare the data between different implementations. That's a very good use case. That's what I would like to have this for.
Comparing output data, well, that's actually outside of the scope for this, because data since this thing putting data objects inside of string makes it for that you need another specification where you canonicalize the embedded data types. That means that the canonicalizer must know what data types are embedded in strings, and that makes...
I'm not talking about that. That would be a deterministic mapping from an application data model to a JSON data model.
Yes.
And that is obviously, as the previous discussion has shown, outside the scope of this work. And I think
it is
good that we have recognized that.
a specific application may want to go ahead and define A, its data model, its application data model, and B, a deterministic mapping to JSON.
Do you have any particular application you're thinking of? Because I don't know too much about that.
Well, we have tons of applications in the constraint space that has descriptive metadata in the form of JSON. So we are interested in that, but it's a different problem.
Okay.
So once we have this defined JSON data model level, we can write application standards that not only define the application data model, but also say how exactly this is mapped into the JSON data model, and we are solving the problem you had on the previous slide.
I see.
That's separate work. So I think this is a good thing to have, and I have at least one use case. Now I would like to add, but that's maybe for SecDispatch, I don't like the idea of embedded signatures. So yeah, but we will discuss that later on. I think it's maybe a good idea to look at the use cases in a little bit wider view than just looking at the embedded signature case that you have been talking about.
Okay. I will be here until Thursday. You can grab me anytime. We can discuss it.
Matthew Miller. I mean, for what this is defining, it's probably okay. I like Karsten. I mean, it would be good to have a better understanding of what are the use cases we're trying to cover here.
I see.
It's like Karsten said. I mean, in my experience, the very simple data types in JSON get you only so far, and it is not as far as most applications need to go. Things like sets, more complex data types, it gets really complicated. This might be a starting point for an application to then profile further. I'm still not sure myself, but these are important considerations that need to go into canonicalization that can mess things up.
Sure. Eric Criscorla. So I'm still trying to, I guess, wrap my head around the problem statement. So when we designed Jose, and then I guess some Seaborg follows on this theory, we explicitly eschewed canonicalization because the experience had been that all previous signature formats that had canonicalization had been debacles, and not just XML desync. And so we explicitly decided that that wrapping was better. There was, I think, some thought that sharp containment between distinction between the wrapper and the thing being signed was good, though I think that wasn't achieved particularly well. So it seems to me that you want to backtrack on both those decisions, which may or may not be a good idea. We could certainly have been wrong. But I guess I'm trying to understand what the problem statement with those designs is. And as far as I can tell, it comes down to you don't think it's legible.
It comes to what?
That you don't think it's legible to have multiple levels of wrapping and base64 encoding. Is there some other actual problem?
The idea is keeping JSON as JSON rather than wrapping it in B64. That is the simplest explanation of what the use case.
Why would I like that?
Because it doesn't make sense if it's not necessary to base 64. The idea was, is it actually necessary? And I found out it is not necessary. If you put some constraints on your JSON, it will work fine. And you can keep your JSON objects in JSON, and you can embed. It makes the messages more clear. With JVS, you have the messages embedded in signature containers. With this system, you rather have messages that are signed. That's sort of the opposite. And for people that are interested in information-based systems like me, where the signature is just an add-on, or it's of course important, but the message is the most important part of that. That's the core. I am working with those payment systems, and these guys, they are more concerned about the actual messages.
Well, I'm not sure I want them to be concerned with actual messages because the signatures are important. Yeah. But I guess I'm still not understanding, like, not necessary is not usually the reason we design like an entirely new specification. So what is wrong with the thing that we currently have?
There's nothing wrong. It works. It's just not so readable.
Okay, so like, just to recap, it seems to me your objection is you don't think the current thing is legible.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
I just wanted to agree with Karsten that
Can
sorry,
you-
this is
yes,
Jeffrey Yaskin.
thank you.
Wanted to agree with Karsten that a deterministic serialization is useful, and doing it at the JSON level is a prerequisite for doing it at the protocol level. So that's a good use case to keep in mind.
Yes.
Yeah, Carsten Norman, I would maybe just like to add that specific base64 problem, of course, also comes up in other environments. And that's one of the things that CBOR actually solves. So for me, it's not so much a problem, but for other people, it might be. But again, I would really like to discuss the deterministic serialization part here, because that's the app thing. And whether that's useful for security or not, I actually don't care, because I want it for the other use case.
I see. It's technically possible to do. You have to define a serialization for each embedded data type then. That is what's needed, and it's a possibility, and it could be standardized. If it will be adopted, that's another thing.
Sure. So I think that it's important to sharpen this question about whether it's for security or not, because the use cases are different. And in particular, so in two respects. In one respect, having like a deterministic serialization for protocol purposes, as you suggest, requires like a much deeper relationship with the inner content, as opposed to just like this is a string that happens to have some semantics and we're going to render it. And the second is that if we screw it up, like it doesn't, and it's for not security purposes, maybe it doesn't matter so much. But if you screw up for security purposes, it's actually quite bad. So I think like figuring out exactly what we're trying to accomplish probably like actually is a little important.
Yes, Blumen. So let me clarify that. You cannot standardize standard mapping from an application data model to a JSON data model without also standardizing the equivalence relationship the application has. And this kind of rules out doing it unless you are embedded in the application. I mean, you are standardizing the application when you are standardizing the equivalence relationship. So this is no longer a JSON issue, it's really an application issue. So we really have to start from the JSON data model and forget all that about application data. So somebody has to take care of doing deterministic encoding of application data into the JSON data model. And then this takes off and does the deterministic encoding of the JSON data model into a JSON string.
I see this, what you're saying, is a superset of this, because this is sort of a lower form of canonicalization that enables you to hash JSON messages, while you're talking about a full canonicalization that requires definition of each of embedded data types, the exact serialization. People said to me, why not go for CBOR? You don't have this problem. They see CBOR as a solution and forget about JSON. And that is a possibility.
But again, it's two layers. And
yes, there's two layers.
On the lower layer.
Yes, this is a lower layer, and that is the one I'm focusing right now.
JSON data model, define deterministic mapping from the data model to the string.
Yes,
that's
but
what
they don't exclude each other. It's just for, let's say.
But it's another layer. The application can go ahead
absolutely,
and
absolutely.
then do the other layers.
Absolutely.
So Martin Thompson, I was just going to ask Echo, if we defined a canonicalization format with no expectation of security, do you really believe that it would never be used in a security sensitive context? Yeah. Okay. The answer was no, for the record. Yeah, we could totally put a big warning on it. The new format would allow us to put that in flashing, right? Blink tag, yeah.
I will be the first person ignoring that warning, but not the last.
And that's Colin Jennings.
Colin Jennings. I was just going to say, I mean, you know, having things in the point of JSON is to put things in human readable form, right?
Yes.
So this is clearly about making it in human readable form, right? And there are some times where that's useless, and there's sometimes there's advantages of it. Like, for example, some of our own specs in IETF that put this in this had it wrong for years and no one noticed because you couldn't catch it on casual explanation. I'm thinking of some of the stir token signatures were just wrong. We would have noticed that if they weren't base 64 encoded. So maybe. I'm not saying that that's a trait. I'm not arguing with the security guys that this would be better or worse. I'm just saying we have blown this mistake on the other side.
Sure. But I mean, I guess this is probably, we're going to have a discussion in sex dispatch as well, but a clear separation between the container and the contained is actually critically important. This is why, like, for instance, we moved to AEAD algorithms in across the IETF to precisely avoid people being able to work on the data without performing the cryptographic transforms to verify it's okay. So designing a system that makes it easy to ignore the cryptographic transform and it access the underlying data is undesirable, not desirable.
So this is Pete Resnick. And to Ecker's point right there, this is a trade-off. So one of the things that happens when you encode the whole bucket and is that applications implementers take that whole thing and pass it off to the library code for the security stuff and get out whatever comes out. And there are times where that is exceedingly inconvenient. For instance, the general example in IMAP is I can't do crap without taking the whole SMIME thing and hand it off to someone. I cannot manipulate any of the internal bits and give the user experience I want to give, even if I'm going to go and do all of the security stuff. I've got to download all this crap onto a device that maybe is too small to do that. So there are advantages in having all of the, well, I understand that the point is you shouldn't do that, says the security person, and I get that, but if I'm a supposed trustworthy implementer, I can at least present the user experience of there's a part here, and I can tell you what sort of part that is and put the appropriate icon, and then when the user finally clicks on it, I can take the bucket of bits and hand it off. But being able to have structure that is protocol readable, and then the security inside it, and maybe this goes too far, but having that structure is useful.
I can comment on that. There is something called Open Trust Protocol, and there's a group called TEEP that have exactly this problem. They use this JVS with base 64 encoding, but since they wanted to know what kind of object is coming on the line, they had to add an artificial JSON container outside, which is sort of ridiculous. So they have a two-layer structure where the outer layer, of course, is not signed. And that was for convenience. They have one line and channel, and they can send different objects. They want to know what objects is coming before they start processing. And that means that the verifier must check that the inner and the outer object actually is the same. So it adds quite a lot of inconvenience to applications as well.
So you forgot one word there, which is allegedly coming. I mean, so again, the point of the security transforms, right, is to.
So, yeah, we're running out of time
Sure,
on this,
okay,
but
okay.
yeah.
You do it in the afternoon?
Well, we're gonna, because this is gonna go into the SEC dispatches. Okay, perfect. And so I think we've had good discussion that will feed that discussion. So, because I don't think we're dispatching anything.
Right, so we're not dispatching. The recap is the actual dispatching is on SEC dispatch. We have had some discussion that there may be application layer use cases for this that may be independent, but obviously will interact with security use cases, and legibility is important sometimes, except when it's not.
Okay, well, thank you, Anders. Okay, we have Brian Rosen in the room, so we are going to switch back to dispatch, because we were doing art just now, people, so we've gone back and forth. I hope everybody's okay with that.
If you're not, tough.
Okay, Brian, you have to get his.
You gotta get my slides, yes. And I apologize for being late. The airlines were not cooperating and canceled the flight. Anyways, so that's good. We're trying to start an effort which we call RUM, a relay user machine, which is a SIP profile for a video phone that's used by a video relay service. So video relay services used by a deaf, hard of hearing, or speech impaired person to communicate using sign language. They have a video phone, they communicate using sign language to interpreter, the interpreter communicates using voice to someone that doesn't understand sign language. Yeah, I don't think I need it. So it's useful to standardize this interface. I'll go through a few reasons why. But this is a UNI interface. This is a device interface. It's build a device that can talk to any interpreter service. Interpreter services in different countries work in different ways. In some, there are commercial enterprises that have government funding when they're used by authorized people, and they compete with one another, so there's multiples of them, and the users want to be able to use the same device with all of them. And that's not the way it works now. When they change to providers, they have to change devices because they're all proprietary. So the goal is to create a standardized device that can be used with multiple service providers. So this is the device interface. There are other profiles for provider to provider, and that's not in scope for this work. I do have a draft that was developed in another environment that is we hope is the basis for it, but it doesn't have to be. That's Rosenbrew 00. And we do have a room reserved 10 to 11 on Wednesday to get going if you are interested.
And as we go to the next slide, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second and let people know this is actually a working group in formation. So we're actually a bit past the normal dispatch process. The charter is currently in external review. And I think it's highly likely that we will have a working group within the next small number of weeks. So what you can kind of see the discussion here and this discussion on Wednesday is to try to jumpstart that work. So keep that in mind. This is real work. It's already been through the initial review of the IESG, and unless something surprising happens, I expect we'll see a working group really soon now.
I did want to go and present the charter. The charter is not finalized. It's still in review. There's still an opportunity to change it. We have had discussion on the dispatch list on the charter. Changes were made as a result of that. There have been various changes due to AD concerns. But currently, well, maybe not. Okay. Just go to the next one. I will go through this quickly. I don't want to take too much of your time.
Just one more second.
Yep.
Well, I'll go ahead and give Paul the floor if that's okay.
Okay.
He's remote.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I assume he has a question for clarification or something. Okay, Paul, you have the floor.
Hi. I just want one comment on the previous slide. This meeting on Wednesday, I don't see it listed in the Meet Echo meeting. Is it possible to enable that one for Meet Echo?
Unfortunately, the side rooms that we have available are expressly don't have Meet Echo support. I really don't like that, but it's what it is. That's what they told me. They said use a side meeting, and the side meetings don't have Meet Echo support.
Okay. I won't be there.
I know. There's several people who would like to be there who won't be able to be there. I will see if I can arrange something, but I don't think so. We can work on it. We'll work on it. Okay, so the charter. So there's these instances of VRS, Video Relay Service, that use SIP. And it's used to communicate with speech impaired people. Video phone to an interpreter. Interpreter uses a phone call. Typically, it can use any other mechanism. And you can do it both ways. You can call the interpreter, and then the interpreter will place the video phone connection. So having a standardized interface allows the vendors and open source developers to build devices that work with multiple service providers. Just for your interest, there's already a open source implementation of the draft that I have that's being worked on, and they're committed to implement whatever comes out of this work. So there will be existence proofs of this work when we're done. The device could be a purpose-built video phone, could be a box, or it could be code that's downloaded on a PC or something like that. And what we want to make sure of is that all of the things that matter when you do that are interoperable. So codecs, media transport, addressing, SIP features. And that's a profile of SIP. That's what we want to do. So the output of the group is a single document, which is the profile. And it includes video, real-time text, and audio. And it'll represent our current thinking on all of those things. We're not trying to not reinvent the world with the wheel. We will reference things that exist. We don't really want to build anything new. And in particular, we're going to try and reuse a lot of the work that WebRTC did in the media. We're not anticipating any protocol changes at all. There's going to be no protocol work. We do need to worry about things like telephone numbers and other things, but we're not going to assume that the hearing users are on the PSTN. But that is the way it's usually implemented now. We just want to make sure that we're more general than that for this work. We've talked a lot about the interaction of this in WebRTC. We backed off a little bit on it in the charter, but we want to make sure, we would like to make sure that you could implement this client by using a WebRTC implementation so that the server created the SIP that this profile defines. That's not an explicit goal. It's just a thing we'd like to figure out. And at any rate, we want to maximize the interoperability between WebRTC implementations in this. Again, we're trying to reuse the work, not to invent new stuff. So that's the goal. There's a requirement that it be interoperable with emergency services. The IETF has done work on that. We're going to include that work, which, by the way, is being implemented in the United States and Canada and a couple of other places. So we're going to reference the existing eCrit work. Yes?
Paul has another question. If that's
Yes.
okay for interruptions? Or
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, Paul.
I'm
You've got the floor again, Paul.
just questioning a little bit whether it is only a SIP profile. I mean, a lot of the work is definitely a SIP profile, but as I understand it, there's some things that are, like address book synchronization and some things like that that maybe fall outside of SIP profile, but are still part of this thing.
Yeah, I don't want to get constrained by the word profile, but it'll be up to the work group to decide how much of the stuff that's in that draft, which includes things like provisioning of the device, we want to include. But yes, it's really a little bit beyond a SIP profile because it does get into provisioning things. Again, we don't need to have that there. The current draft has it, but it's not the most important part of it. The part that matters is the SIP SDP media piece, not the other stuff. But that's a little bit, even when you say SDP and RTP related things, that's already getting a little bit beyond SIP. Yes.
So I'm trying to, Aaron Falk, I'm trying to reconcile the name that you've chosen, the text that you're showing in the charter, and the use case you're describing. And it sounds to me like the hard of hearing part is really a motivating use case that you could, could you put a language translator at this intermediary instead of a sign language translator? Or are you specifically trying to address this one particular use case?
That's a really interesting question, which I haven't really considered. I think it's just going to work. The mechanisms that we want to use include the language tagging mechanisms that we developed in SLIM, so that you know that you've got a American Sign Language video on one side and English audio on the other side. So if you wanted to translate French audio to English audio, I think what we're talking about is going to work just fine. It's clearly biased to make sure that video phones work, and you don't need video for that, but I think it will just work. And if you want us to modify the charter to expressly make it work, I don't think that would be an issue. I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't.
I think it's worth considering, or possibly choosing a name that is more specific to the use case that you're addressing. And where is the machine in this?
I worked hard to do the SIP thing of alcohol related. Yeah.
Martin Thompson.
Yes.
The M stands for man in the middle.
Oh, okay. Yes, it is a man in the middle, actually.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of discussion in that in the charter, and I only have the table of contents of the document in front of me right now. But how much thinking on that aspect of things have you done?
Well, I mean, it is a man in the middle. That is the use case.
Right.
I think that we have not spent any time thinking about whether we want to do anything to assure the end users that they are communicating with expressly with one another, if that's what you're getting at.
That is kind of what I'm getting at, yes. And the question is, who chooses the man in the middle in this case?
Right. So it's somewhat dependent on country. I can tell you exactly how it works in the US, and Gunnar or Hellstrom or somebody could tell you how it works out in Sweden, and it works slightly differently in different countries. In the US, there are multiple competing providers, and there's a database that associates a telephone number with which provider is the current provider, and there's an express way to select another one in the signaling, so that you can do this thing called dial round, which the charter actually does reference, which allows you to select a provider expressly from one end or the other, from the originating end.
So it's the originating caller.
The originating caller
chooses
can choose the translation service, yes. There's a default if you don't, and an express way to do it if you wish.
So the question comes, to what extent do you believe it necessary to have discussion of these things in the charter as opposed to just discussion of these things in
that's a great question.
And how much work do you anticipate there being in the working group on this subject, and
yeah,
that will dictate how much charter?
It has not come up. We didn't think it was a big issue. It has a practical matter. It hasn't been a big issue. Given that we're doing the full IETF process, I think that's probably not good enough.
I trust that you're going to do the right thing.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think we probably want to say something.
Jonathan Lax, I mean, I guess relatedly, the security issues are like letting the end user know that this really is the translation service they think it is, and not somebody launching a murder attack on them.
Yes, I think it is something that we have completely ignored, and that's wrong. Sorry, we'll fix it. You really do want to know. I'm now worried I'm now inventing mechanism, and then I said I wasn't going to do any protocol mechanisms, and so like that's an issue. But that's why we have these things. Right? That's why we discuss it, and we knew when we brought it into the full process that we were going to get issues like this. So thank you.
I mean, if you do end up inventing new protocol in this, it'll never be implemented across any of the devices outside of the center. So it will, I mean, as you well know, it won't deploy. So, I mean, I love your current draft. It seems to be as secure as you can possibly make it within the limits of what will actually deploy.
Yeah.
I mean, keep it realistic, which I know I fully trust you will.
Yes. Yes, that's true.
Relaying Eric Berger, before Brian freaks out, I think 90% of the "am I talking with who I am talking with" is already present in SIP.
Yeah, Eric, but you get the issue that you get the call from the, I mean, let's take an inbound call. A hearing user calls a deaf user. The call that the deaf user sees is from the interpreter service, and that part can be made secure, but how do you know securely what the original caller is?
Chris, when John and I have been talking about the backwards third case for a little while, maybe this is a good excuse to do that. You know.
Oh, gee. No, this is great. I'll talk to you. That would be great. And John too. That's terrific. All right, let's move on so we don't, because we wanted to keep this down to 20 minutes. Point-to-point calls are possible, which don't involve an interpreter. That's a simple bypass of the interpreter mechanism. The device profile should just work. That's the idea. The text does come out where you can select a provider using this dial round mechanisms. And that has additional requirements, and they are in scope. We do note that the interface between providers has to work if if you have a point-to-point call and one is on one provider and another is on another provider, then the two providers have to have an interface that works. But that is out of scope. There is a document that does that for the providers. On the other hand, if we go and mess with the codecs, it may affect that, and we understand that. Next. This is the whole charter in one page. It's exactly the same text. I just wasn't sure which one would be easier to deal with. Just go right on. I put up here the outline from the draft, just so you know what's in that draft. I don't need to read it. It's just giving you the idea of what's in there. This is just a individual submission that will ask that the work group adopt, but it doesn't have to do that. But it's got call origination and the dial round stuff and NAT traversal things and media, audio, video, and text. It deals with security. It deals with, again, a few things that get a little bit beyond SIP because it includes CardDAV and a couple other things for contacts and the provisioning thing and mail waiting. So those are the things that are in the draft as it exists now. But again, will be subject to contributions and discussion in the work group. Next. I think that's the last slide. So this is the status that we said. We've got this charter discussion going underway. Looks like I need to make one change to the charter, which I'll work on the text for that. And hopefully we'll have it. And then the side meeting is 10 to 11 in Paris. And I really appreciate anybody joining us so we can get started on this.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so we've finished our main agenda, both dispatch and art. So now we are at our any other business point in time, if anybody has anything else they want to add. Or we're done a little bit early. We did a good job with keeping our time.
So someone told me the people working on the pay-to URI schemes might want to plug something at the mic, but I don't see anyone getting up.
Okay, final chance. Okay, I think we're done. And blue sheets are right there. Okay, did everybody get a chance? Yeah.
Brian, can you get a blue sheet, right?
No, but aren't we at the top? We list our names at the top. I never sign it when I share.